Hi my loves, welcome back to me and to you. I'm going to be doing my April and May books today. I thought about including June as well because I know June has passed us, but it was just going to take me too long to write up my June reviews and get them out for you, because I was going to film this whilst I was away. If you don't know, I've been in America on some epic trip for about 7 weeks. So that's where I've been. I was going to film this whilst I was away, but it never happened. And it's also nice to film anyway when I've got the copies of the books with me. The next book video will be coming out at the beginning of September so that I can do a June, July and August books video all in one, and that gives you time to read the book for book club, because exciting announcement, there is going to be a bit of spiel at the beginning of this video. This month's book club pick is Persuasion by Jane Austen. Obviously the film came out recently, it's been trashed everywhere, everyone hates it, but that inspired me. I made a little short list of books actually, and I put it on my Instagram and you all voted for Persuasion. Not all of you actually, and I feel really bad for those of you that voted for the other two books because I also am really excited about the other two books. I also had Gilead by Marilyn Robinson on there and Hummingbird Salamander. To be fair, the blurb of Gilead is not very appealing, I don't feel, to like lots of people, but I do think that book's going to be gorgeous, so I'm considering making you all read it for a book club at some point. And I'm also surprised by how many votes we had. I kind of suspected this might be the pick, to be fair, but I'm also surprised by how many votes Hummingbird Salamander had by Jeff Vandermeer. Which is like an eco-thriller. So I will consider both of those for the next month's book club. If you have strong feelings about that, please DM me on Instagram. But Persuasion. Persuasion is the pick. It did win out against the other two. So we're going to read a classic. It's been a while. It's been a while since I read any Austen, for sure. Many years, I think. Hi my loves. I'm just popping in here because my camera cut out at this crucial moment when I was explaining my Patreon and the way it works to you. So apologies, I look a little worse for wear because I was not expecting to be on camera today. I was expecting to just be sat at my little desk editing. But anyway, Patreon, let's talk about it. It's finally ready to go. I am back from my trip, like I said, so I'm ready to put my all into it. But if you're not interested in joining the Patreon, that is absolutely fine. Everything will be exactly as it always has been, so I will let you know the book club pick. I will discuss it at the top of the next book video. As always, nothing has changed, and you can discuss in the comments. Patreon will just take it a level up. So there are 3 tiers. The first tier will be mostly like forum based. So you'll have access to the Patreon feed. Also, you'll have access to our Discord club group thing. I don't fully know all the Discord terms. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but I have familiarised myself with it as far as one can without anyone else on the group with me. But essentially it's just like a forum, and there'll be threads. We can talk about the book club pick, but we can also talk about all sorts of other things. I've got some starter threads ready up there. In fact, I think they're called channels, and then you have threads inside the channels. I've got some starter channels up there ready to go. We can talk about any other books you like. We can talk about TV, film. Set up a little channel for the parents of Sunbeamsjess on there if you want to chat with us. So yes, I'm sure lots of the other things will come up in time, but that will be like our community. So that is tier 1. Tier 2 is you're going to have all the benefits of tier 1 and also early access to videos, so they will be going up earlier, and also either a live Q&A or an extra video every month. The final tier will have all those benefits plus a book club Zoom, so it'd be more like a proper book club. I'll send out the Zoom link and we'll all chat about the book that I have picked, or we have picked collectively. Super excited about that. So the way the book club will work for the first tier is that a thread about the current book club pick will go live after we've had that book club Zoom. So we can talk in the Zoom with kind of fresh minds, not having read and discussed too much on the forum first. So we'll do that, and then that thread will go live, and then we can chat about the book club pick after that. So I hope that that makes sense, but I'm hoping that if you pop onto the Patreon page it will make a little bit more sense if what I've just said is confusing. Yes, I'm super excited about it, so excited to connect with you. I think in my original chat with you I was just talking about why I was doing the Patreon, but it just gives me a really nice opportunity to connect with you in a safe space. Social media can be a little bit of a fraught place, and I think this will be a really lovely way to create a community out of what I've built here. You know, I have been on here for a very long time. Many of you have been following me for a long time. Many of you really love the bookish content. Back in the day I would have been like, why would I charge my followers anything for any content? But I'm really going to pour my heart and soul into this, and I think it's just such a useful way to create a book club that works for everyone and that can be really involved. I feel like the world can be a very lonely place at the moment as well, and I just love the idea of creating a community that is kind of like-minded and supportive, and I'm hoping that we can all like make friends through it and stuff as well. So I really hope some of you will join me on there. I'm really excited about it. I will let you get back to the video now. So that first Zoom will be at the end of August. I really hope some of you can join me. I really want to put a lot of effort into this. Like I said, it's a really wonderful way for me to support myself and my little family by directly connecting with you rather than through brands and sponsorships and that kind of thing. And I can just make content for you, and we can talk and have fun, have a really beautiful community on there together, a safe space. I really hope some of you will join me on there. I will leave a link to it down below. But for now, let's get into the rest of the video. So last book video's book club pick was White Noise by Don DeLillo. Yes, an interesting novel. Yeah, so I've said before that I have read one other Don DeLillo novel. It was 0K. I read it at university as part of my one of my American lit courses. That's one of his slightly more recent novels. I think this one's from the 80s. However, both of them are really weird. I forgot how weird Don DeLillo is. I think because I read the Denis Johnson, which I will talk to you about in a minute, in this period of time, and in my head I had put the two authors in the same category because they're like white men writing from the 80s through to now, kind of big cultish names in American literature, and both kind of postmodern. But Don DeLillo is definitely at the more postmodern end of things, the more absurd, the more satirical kind of end of things. So this book follows Jack Gladney, who is head of Hitler studies at the College on the Hill, so you can already see some of the academic satire happening here, which is definitely, the first half of the novel is definitely concerned with that. It's quite funny at times, it's very caustic. If I look down, by the way, I've got notes for today because I read some of these books a long time ago. He has this like big family cobbled together of his and his current wife's kids from other marriages, along with one son of their own. And he has this unusually strong fear of death, which is made worse by the airborne toxic event, which happens sort of partway through the book. And this really creates big shifts in dynamics in his life and the way he thinks about himself and his wife. This book has that absurd kind of disjointed feeling that you get when you read like quite postmodern fiction. You've got that real sense of disorientation. He's commenting on academia, he's commenting on American consumerism and American culture. The dialogue is especially good. It's kind of quick-witted and quite funny at times, and also just really kind of jumps off the page, but it is enormously clever. Like, definitely you could go back and read this again and again and find new stuff every time, thematically and like in the writing itself. So yes, I will definitely be reading more Don DeLillo, because he is weird, and I kind of like how he kind of sits across genres. So he's definitely a very literary writer and kind of well regarded and all that kind of stuff. But he also kind of uses some speculative fiction elements, which definitely in 0K, that's a sci-fi basically. And even in this book, 2, I like that. So I will definitely be reading more DeLillo because I feel like the kind of literary sci-fi or speculative fiction that I enjoy these days, I think probably it has a lot of roots in DeLillo's work, as well as those writers who are considered like out and out speculative fiction writers. So on to the Denis Johnson I read. So I read Train Dreams. For some reason I cannot say Train Dreams, which I picked up because I remember reading at the end of 2019, going into 2020, like the best fiction of the past 10 years, and like underrated fiction from the past 10 years, and Train Dreams was definitely on there because I think the year Train Dreams came out, they shortlisted 3 books for the Pulitzer and then decided none of them were worthy of winning, which is crazy to me if you read Train Dreams against some other things that have won the Pulitzer. But anyway, I really liked it. I've made a bit of a point recently about short books. As you can see, it's a novella. So many of them feel rushed, unfinished, but then you find someone who is just a really excellent short story writer, like for example Alice Munro, or you find a really good novella like this one. You just remember that it is an art form in and of itself, like separate from the novel, to write short fiction, to do it well. And it's so good when you find like someone do it really well. I love it. So this book is about Robert Grenier. He's a labourer living and working in the American West in early 20th century America. So we follow him kind of in various periods of his life, kind of jump back and forth through those different times, and we come to this kind of really breathtaking conclusion. Also, of course, at the same time, we witness the American West at a really transformative moment. So this is one of those books which, as all fiction should be, but particularly short fiction, where every word counts, you know, everything is a distillation of the themes of the novel. You know, when you combine that with the evocation of the grand American landscape, you get something that really feels expansive and spacious even though it is short. It's kind of deceptively simple, but the prose is just gorgeous. It's surprising as well, like a sentence will start and then it will kind of flip and turn inside out, which I love. If you liked In the Distance, I think you'll like this one. It's got kind of a isolation plus American West theme. It's really about showing like what goes into a life, including like the most shameful moments, the most heroic moments of your life, you know, what makes a person, and also about Grenier's kind of inability to fit either fully in society or fully in nature. So I really, really loved this one and I would highly recommend it. There are definitely awkward race relations moments in it that is kind of unavoidable, I think, writing about the American West at the time. Denis Johnson is kind of inhabiting the language of the time and inhabiting kind of the spirit of Grenier through the writing, so it's not explicitly condemned, but I think it's fairly obvious that the most shameful moments of the novel are in some of those moments. But do be warned, particularly with regard to Chinese immigrants in the American West at the time. So, moving on to Angels, I was so excited about Train Dreams. I went straight into Angels, which is something I rarely do, go straight into the same author again. Now this is a very different book actually. I feel like this one is more in keeping with more of Johnson's writing from what I have read thematically. I think this one is, has more similarities to more of his work. This is also his first book. So it was written in the 80s, I believe, or was published in the 80s. So yeah, it's the work of a more fresh author, and it is a lot more brutal. I actually almost put this down at 40 pages in because I just didn't know if I was in the mood for this kind of book. It's about 2 born losers, that's what the blurb says. Jamie and Bill, who meet on a Greyhound bus. Jamie is running away from her husband with her 2 young daughters. Bill is just travelling from place to place, getting into trouble, committing crimes, you know, drinking too much. So together for the first 40 pages or so, they do much the same thing. They kind of go from place to place, stumble in and out of bars and motels with these 2 little girls in tow, which broke my heart many a time. And then the plot takes off after one of the most distressing sexual assault scenes I have ever read. Huge trigger warning on this book for basically everything. Yeah. And then the plot moves on a little quicker then. It seems to kind of gain momentum and purpose. And then it builds to this ending which is like seared into my brain and is very intense and like gut-wrenching. I felt like I had been hollowed out when I read this. So if you're in the mood for something intense, you could try Angels. The prose is again incredible. I feel like Jamie and Bill, they really jump off the page. They feel very real. I think this book shines a light on the vulnerable and asks, you know, who, if anyone, is irredeemable. I think there are some irredeemable characters in this book, but you know, it's bringing up some of those themes. That is Angels. I will be reading more Johnson for sure. I bought Jesus' Son, which I think is a collection of short stories, I think similar in theme to Angels. So I will read that at some point. Next, we have Either Or by Elif Batuman. Here we are, guys. My copy's looking very sad because it went to the beach. The follow-up to The Idiot. As with any book you loved, particularly a sequel you weren't expecting, like I really wasn't expecting her to write more of Celine's story, but now that she has, I'm like, there's definitely going to be a third book, because the first book focused on Celine's freshman year, this one on her sophomore year, so we've got to finish it off, sure. But yes, as with any follow-up to a book you loved, you get nervous. So I was apprehensive going into this, hoping it would be as good as The Idiot. So I would say it is as good as The Idiot. I think the two combined, and probably when the kind of series is complete, really ask so many interesting questions about the novel format, and they're really clever and very kind of literary. So if you don't know, these books are about Celine, who's a Turkish American. She's a second generation Turkish American who's gone to Harvard. As I said, first year's covered in the first book, second year's covered in the second book. And she's just basically reflecting on her life, talking about silly things that happened to her, but also having, you know, quite intense philosophical and literary conversations. There's lots of funny moments in both books. Did I enjoy every single moment of reading this book? Not really. I had just listened to The Idiot as well to kind of refresh my memory, so I was very aware, I think, of any of the kind of quite subtle differences between the two books. This one definitely feels like Celine's lost some of that naivety, which makes a lot of sense. She's a little bit more caustic, she has this kind of sexual awakening in the second half of the book. She's a little bit more mature, she's a little bit more grown up, and so some of that kind of warmth and some of the comedy of the first book is lost a tiny bit in this one. Also, the first half of the book, there's a lot of Ivan obsession, which there also is in The Idiot. He's like a guy that she finds herself in love with, but in this one he's not even there. So I think Batuman does a fantastic job of capturing that kind of obsession, that kind of young unrequited love produces in people, but reading it up close did feel almost painful, and also like you kind of want to whack Celine over the head. But I do think that's the point. I don't think that's a flaw in the writing. But in general, I really enjoyed the book. I thought it was very clever. I think it's quite unique, even though I know that autofiction is really having a moment. I like the way that she just seemed to, because we're kind of all aware, I think, that she's borrowing, that Batuman's borrowing quite heavily from her own life. I love the way she kind of defends herself from potential reader complaints, you know, asking why are science and history books allowed to be boring but a novel isn't? Why can't a literary work be overly personal? Why does she, as an author, have to make up characters completely from scratch? Why can't she base them on people that she knows? What does it mean to write a work of fiction? Does that make a novel? Does it make a good novel? I would say yes. Along with Batuman, it's like reading different layers of her. But yeah, I think if you liked The Idiot, you'll like this one. Again, it's got that kind of meandering nature to it, so if you didn't like The Idiot, I wouldn't pick this one up. But yeah, I enjoyed it, and there are plenty of funny moments in here too. Next, Telephone. I read this novel in like a 24-hour days, which is something that I rarely do these days. I even stayed up to read it. And when you're as sleep deprived as me, that is saying something. Mostly because when I get to that time of day, I just can't even focus on reading that well because I'm so tired. But that was quite a few weeks and one massive trip to America ago. So I'll do my best to review this. So one of the first things to know about this book is that it has 3 endings. Different versions of this book exist out in the world. I think you're supposed to be able to tell by the way the compass is pointing at the top. I would love to get my hands on the other copies. I will be looking out for them. There is a really, really good LitHub review of someone that has got all 3 copies and read all 3 copies. I will leave a link to that down below because it's going to be much better than my review, and it's really, really interesting actually. So I will leave that down below for you. So if you aren't familiar with Percival Everett, he is a prolific author. He's written 23 novels. He's kind of considered one of those like underrated cult authors, but he was shortlisted for the Pulitzer for this book, so that's how I came to read it. This is a very clever book with very kind of careful, controlled prose. There's loads of stuff going on in here with chess and other things that definitely went completely over my head because I was very emotionally connected and invested in this book. It's about paleobiologist / geologist Zach, who learns that his daughter has a degenerative disease and essentially turning life into a game of telephone. At the same time, he orders a jacket from eBay and there's a little note in one of the pockets saying "help me," and that leads him on another journey. I think it was the parenting aspect that really struck me in this book. It is a very sensitively written portrayal of parenthood, of grief, of mortality. It's painful, it's heart-wrenching. You know, as all mums say when they become mums, I'm like a sensitive Sally these days. So I really was like touched by this book. But as I say, there's a lot of clever stuff going on in it too, which went over my head because I was too busy reading it. But yeah, I would definitely recommend it. It's an unusual book. It's kind of also quite meandering. It's a little bit absurd, a little bit discomforting. But as I say, it kind of, something about it really struck me. So that is Telephone. Next up we have Duck Feet by, I think, is it Ellie Percy or Eli Percy? I'm not entirely sure, but they are a Scottish author, and Duck Feet is a really lovely, heartwarming novel with lots to like about it. It's set in the mid-noughties in Renfrew and Paisley, and it follows Kirsty Campbell through a few school years of her life, so it's about teenagerdom. It's written in the local dialect accent, so it might take you a few pages and some familiarity with Scottish slang and ways that Scots speak to kind of get into. And it's by and large a pretty true to life recreation of teenager life at the time, with all of its joys, all of its firsts and heartaches and hardships. It also explores and presents working class life in a really sensitive way. The ending did give me pause in some ways, just how it fit with the rest of the book, but it is also really touching and moving, and you can't help but feel for the characters and kind of feel for their story as we move through the book. A couple of caveats. I found it a little bit too long. It's quite a big book of kind of the ins and outs of teenage life, and sometimes I found it too realistic. I know that kind of sounds stupid. I think for that reason lots of people will enjoy it, but for me the joy of the novel format is a little bit of experimentation within that, and kind of pushing the limits where it kind of felt like a really beautiful, accurate portrayal. I kind of wanted another level, but I do think lots of people appreciate it for that, so I think that's a reader thing, not necessarily a writing thing. So yeah, I felt it dragged a little bit through the middle, but I do feel like lots of people will enjoy this one. If it sounds like your cup of tea, it probably is. Okay, Ordinary Monsters. Yes, as I said in my last video, doing the Sunday Times sci-fi and fantasy or / speculative fiction roundup for them every quarter. It'll be more relevant in the next video because I did most of my reading for that then. But I did read Ordinary Monsters for those reviews, and I did include it in my roundup in the end, and I did really enjoy it. I think that it will have wide appeal. I think lots of you guys will enjoy this one. Within this genre, I think it's a particularly high quality piece because I feel like out and out fantasy, some of it is not great. Some of it's great, but some of it is not great. Like, I think this is a good example of it. So this is a historical fantasy. It's been billed as the next blockbuster. I can see why publishers are so excited about it, or Bloomsbury so excited about it, because it does have that kind of, you can feel the film or TV adaptation of this coming. It follows a number of talents who are generally orphan children with extraordinary abilities. They are mysteriously gathered at an institute near Edinburgh to be educated and kept safe in an alternate Victorian timeline. And to gather these children, the book travels all over the shop. We go to Mississippi, we go to Tokyo, we go to London, and of course Edinburgh. Sorry, I'm having battery problems again today due to my own disorganisation, so if I'm like popping all around the shop, try and ignore it. But that obviously appealed to my soul and to my heart. In general, I thought Miro did a fantastic job of pulling all the strings, different narratives together. I thought there were lovable characters in here. I thought in general the plot's good. It's not one of those first books in a trilogy that doesn't have much happening in it and just kind of sets everything up. There is a lot of action in here, which I liked. It's a little bit baggy. It's a little bit chaotic at times, particularly through the midsection. Apart from a really excellent bit set in Tokyo, that really was quite striking. And there are really striking moments visually, like imagery wise, in this book, which I think are the things that really elevate it above some of its peers. But by the time we get to the first couple hundred pages I really enjoyed, and it also really started to grip me again in the last couple hundred pages. So yeah, through the middle bit I was like, would I read a second novel? But by the time we got to the end I was like, I'll definitely be reading the next book. So it's a little bit untidy, but like I said, there were some really nice, surprisingly striking moments in this. Yeah, I think lots of you will like it. Just be warned about that middle section. You just got to push through a little bit, but it is rewarding in the end. Bewilderment, so I don't have this one. Bewilderment by Richard Powers is next on my list. Read this on my Kindle. This is the final book that I'm going to talk about that I read in this period, which is about a male professor and his family. White Noise and Telephone being the other two, which I don't know why I stumbled upon that theme in this April-May time, but I really did read a lot of those. But it was quite interesting to make a comparison of the three of them. They're all very different from one another. And yes, this is probably the worst of them. So yeah, we all know I loved The Overstory. It did have its flaws, that book, not a perfect book, but I did really like it. But this one was more heavily flawed for sure. This is a book about a father, Theo, and his young son, Robin, who seems to have a combination of ADHD and autism. It's kind of what it seems to be, but it's never explicitly said or discussed. I think maybe to cover Powers' back, I'm not sure. So this makes his insight and his take on the world, you know, really interesting and different, but his behaviour is sometimes challenging for his father. Robin's mother was an environmental activist, and her values run strong through her son, and he finds it really difficult to deal with the world as it is. I mean, as we all do these days, but he is particularly sensitive to the atrocities that are being committed towards the earth, and sentient beings. So Theo is uneasy about putting Robin on medication. He stumbles on a kind of answer, which is this neurofeedback thing, where he basically is tasked with mimicking the brain patterns of healthy people in more calm mental states, including his own mother's, who is dead, as we said. This book is overly sentimental for sure, and the ending is questionable on that front, from various points of view, from its literary merit through to its take on neurodivergence and or disability. Perhaps even the concept of neurofeedback is a little bit confusing. because Robin becomes like a different child. He's more calm and collected and able to control his emotions, almost like inhumanly so. I didn't know what to make of all that, to be honest, and I am not the person to really be able to comment on it. I'm not neurodivergent myself, but I'm pretty certain if you were, you would have kind of some major issues with this book. What do its anti-medication sensibilities mean for those who find their medication life-saving? I don't know about all of that. It just didn't really sit right with me throughout. I do love the way Powers integrates science in his books. Theo is an astrobiologist. It is interesting. There's interesting facts and things in here. For one thing, I would say this book is better than Flowers for Algernon, which it seems to be mimicking the structure, and they even talk about Flowers for Algernon in the book, which I hated. It is better than that, at least, I think. I wouldn't recommend that book. Or this one, though. Yeah. Overall, I found it readable. I kept reading it, but I was like, this has got some major flaws. Okay, Out is next by Natsuo Kirino. Really wanted to love this one because the blurb sounds incredible. You know, a fed-up housewife murders her husband in a fit of rage, and then some of her colleagues from her factory job pull together and decide to help her out, dismember the body for her, and do away with it. I mean, doesn't that sound like a blurb of a book you want to read? But sadly, the execution of this book did not live up to this wonderful blurb. I think it's partly me, because I was expecting this I was expecting it to be a little bit more literary, and to be have these feminist themes. And in actual fact, it's more of a kind of crime. It is just more of a kind of standard crime novel, which if I had gone into it knowing that, maybe I would have enjoyed it a bit more. It is drawn out a little bit too long though, and it has the worst ending in the world. Feminist themes, out the window. Okay, they're gone. So I think it had a lot of potential, especially some of the opening pages were quite tense, but I wish I hadn't pushed through with this one. It just didn't end up being what I wanted it to be. So I'm so sad I can't recommend this, because I really wanted to like it. And our final book is Equinox by David Towsey. This is another advanced copy that I had that I was considering for review. This book has such potential for me. It's a weird one. I don't know why. I just felt like I wanted to continue reading it once I'd started it. It's about a world in which two people share the same body. So there's a day person and a night person. And Christopher, who is the night person, is a special inspector who investigates kind of terrible supernatural crimes, and you've got horror elements coming in there, which I really, really liked. And he has to go and investigate this particular crime in a small village outside of the capital. So there's some world building there, and some kind of sense of the capital being one kind of place politically, and the village being another kind of place politically, which I enjoyed. I think Towsey did a good job of setting all of that up. It's a detective story, a kind of folk horror and a fantasy all rolled into one, which it was compelling, definitely. At the beginning I was like, oh, this is good. It had its clunky moments, but I was taken in by the world. Of course, being me, I would have liked more investigation into what it means to share a body, and how does this world differ structurally from our world because of it, and what is it like only living at night time. I wanted more of that, but I don't think that was the point of the book, so that's just me as a reader being picky about what I like. But yeah, after a strong, really atmospheric start, this book just kind of floundered a little bit, and then the ending was really rushed, really chaotic, and didn't make a whole lot of sense. So I would like to see what he publishes next, because I think there was a lot of potential here, but it just needed work on the pacing and the conclusion, which are really difficult things to nail with a novel, I think. But yeah, it wasn't quite done in this case. So that is everything. My amazing reading year continues. I feel like I'm having a really great time reading some fantastic books, and I hope you have some recommendations from today. So excited about the Patreon. Link down below, as I said. Hope some of you guys will join me. If not, everything will be just the same as it always has been on here. nothing is going away. So yes, thank you so much for watching today. Bye.